This video contains spoilers for the new Archon quest and the world quest. As we arrived at the fourth nation in the mysterious world of Teyvat, Genshin seemed a bit different, somewhat darker, even showing us a side of humanity we hadn't quite seen before. But this introduction to the Nation of Justice also gave us some information about the world that we hadn't talked about yet, at least not in an Archon quest. Now, before we unpack all this, let us go over the major plot reveals during this 2-act quest in a tiny recap before we get into the more complicated stuff. Firstly, Furina or Focalors is a bit of a celebrity, far removed from any of the Archons we've met. She seeks entertainment through trials and the court, but the excitement and drama during these trials are more of a priority to her. Not that the citizens of Fontaine are any different. Second, a prophecy has been circulating around Fontaine for a while now. It states every person in Fontaine is born with sin. Even though the Archon of this nation holds trial after trial, this sin does not leave the people. And one day, the waters of Fontaine will rise up and these sinful people will slowly drown, leaving their Archon weeping on her throne. Only then will their sins be washed away. Thirdly, Lyney and Lynette are Fatui. They were raised in the House of Earth by the Nymph, also known as the Father. They reveal some dark and traumatic experiences about their childhood and how Arlecchino saved Lynette, but also mention that even though the Fatui's bad reputation precedes them, Lyney and Lynette only want to help people. Lyney also mentioned that Arlecchino has received permission from the Tsaritsa to use the power of the Gnosis once she obtains it, and she will help them avoid the prophecy and save Fontaine. Lyney and Lynette have chosen to place their trust on her. Fourth, the accusation and trial against Lyney revealed that the people of Fontaine could be dissolved using a special liquid, the water from the Primordial Sea. These powers of dissolution are specific to the people of Fontaine. When diluted and consumed in the form of synth, it can cause hallucinations and dreams. Fontaine's energy system is powered by the Oratress, which harvests people's belief in justice and converts it into energy, which is used all over Fontaine. The Oratress is also sentient, making judgments based on the facts presented in the court. Paimon and the Traveler remember that both A and Venti mentioned that the gods relied on the people's belief to obtain power. And in this case, Furina was relying on the Oratress to do the same. Also, Fremine tells us a legend about the rain in Fontaine. The rain in Fontaine is very random and sometimes doesn't end for days. It is said that when the Hydro Dragon cries, it rains. Suspiciously, these rains seem to coincide with the moods of a certain Chief Justice who constantly mentions not understanding how human emotions work. But if you ask me, the implications in his design, along with the random tidbits about the Primordial Sea he knew, it's safe to say the identity of the Hydro Dragon isn't exactly hidden. Now we do know that Genshin's Archon quests usually provide a deeper look at the Archons and their people, but there is an attempt to explain the mysterious rules of Teyvat as well. For example, Sumeru explained how the Irminsul worked in a much more detailed fashion, confirming some already known doubts about the world tree. This information did already exist in the game though, even the loading screens have lore in them. So it seems that Genshin follows a system that briefly introduces lore to us to read way before it is mentioned in the actual Archon quest, and Fontaine is no exception to this. For example, the biggest shocker of the Archon quest for me was the primordial sea water and the dissolving people of Fontaine. But this was mentioned in the Nymph's Dream artifact set as well. The Nymph's Constancy talks about the pocket watch and its owner who fell into the primordial liquid that dissolves all. And this set came out towards the end of Sumeru. As for the Primordial Sea, there are more mentions of it in the new weapon ascension materials in Fontaine. The following is in the form of legends and stories, so take it as you will. According to legends, before the birth of life, there was a dense Primordial Sea. It is the purest origin of all things, but one day it shall swallow all life, and the things that did not arise from it will remain like floating debris. When the first usurper came to the Primordial Sea, the first sovereign gave him a goblet of water, which he used to establish a wonderful empire. But the creation of this empire was not enough for the usurper. When he returned from the kingdom of dragons, he wondered, what kind of kingdom could last for 1,000 years? He combined the immortal stone with the ichor essence extracted from the primordial waters and carved a new race, with arcane lithos skin and ichor for blood, never again fearing the curse of returning to the primeval past. Life that comes from the primordial sea is inevitably fated to return to it, But there are infinite possibilities for humans to transcend, and even the waters of the Primordial Sea cannot completely dissolve them. But the usurper had made up his mind and mixed the insoluble ichor with pure water to contain wisdom and memories, allowing his subjects and servants to discard their physical bodies and obtain independent and eternal lives. But the pain of severing soul and body cannot be endured by any ordinary life, and this shattered their souls, and the ichor was dyed black by the crying and howling of so many souls, and the harmony and wisdom was lost. Now, while this usurper wished to transcend the rules of mortality and give his subjects eternal life, there were still portions of the primordial waters that had not been corrupted, and the water in these valleys and springs were guarded by the Lokfolk. But the usurper would not have any disruptions in his plans for the empire, and he would continue to mix the waters with the insoluble ichor, and those spirits, the Lokfolk that were born of pure water, would disappear. The god king or usurper only wished to create a version of the primordial sea, which would create life forms that would not perish or dissolve by those waters. But the method he used not only changed his people, but eventually led his entire kingdom to doom. Using wisdom and memories, an immortal stone, and an insoluble ichor. By the way, fun fact, the word ichor in Greek mythology means the fluid that flows in the veins of the gods. And the god king or usurper was trying to make his people not just immortal, but also transcend them from their human state. One could say that he simply did not want his people to dissolve back into the primordial waters that they came from. But that was not the only thing he wished for. He wanted them to change into something that wasn't their primeval forms. This god king's plans and ambitions are further described in the description of the Golden Troupe artifact set, where he forced his people to change their forms, and the ones that resisted were purged. But eventually, all this ambition to become better is what caused the corruption of his people and the end of his empire. While this might sound like a legend that is more of a cautionary tale about greed and madness, there is a lot of truth in this story. Speaking of creation and transcending one's form, the World Quest Book of Esoteric Revelations had us finding mysterious pages of a book which contains research and some concepts. One of these is the World Formula. Apparently, the books that contain these pages have been passed down from an ancient order. When kingdoms rise and fall, and when a civilization is annihilated, a new one will be born from the ashes, which these books refer to as Fortuna, which apparently bears a theoretical resemblance to the writer's own computational scheme called the World Formula. But unlike the world depicted in the ancient text, no matter how many times this version of the formula was derived, there will be no new civilizations born unless new variables are introduced from outside the system, and a certain sort of power is spoken about which might have a chance to make this world formula work. This is followed by a diagram, and then they mention the techniques used by the Golden Troupe, which we now know from the artifact set. The symbols in these diagrams were similar to the ones found in the documents in the Narzissenkreuz Institute archives. These were known as the seal of Chymical marriage and was divided into two parts. Now, if we are to divide this diagram into two parts, the first is the longer part with triads connected to each other, and the second is the circular part at the bottom. The first part looks akin to the Kabbalah tree of life. Kabbalah is a school of thought in Jewish mysticism. The tree of life is a metaphorical tree, and each part is called a sphirot. There are several definitions of what spherots are. Many scholars liken it to the 10 divine powers or concepts of existence that are placed in a hierarchy that together represent the power of God. The topmost spherot is closest to God, and the one at the bottom is closest to the material world. Disclaimer, this is a very basic explanation of this topic, but I think doing your own research on Kabbalah might be the best way to understand it, so I would recommend looking into it on your own. The other part of this diagram is interesting because this isn't in the Kabbalah tree of life. This overlaps the last spherot of the world tree, which is Malkuth, representing creation, human life, or the material world. The figure itself is a circle, and within the circle there are 4 shapes surrounding the center, which directly overlaps Malkuth. I tried to find shapes and symbols that were closer to the piece in the center, and the only one I found was this Circle of Solomon from the Lesser Key of Solomon. and this magical symbol is used in the evocation of the spirits in the Ars Goetia, which is important because all the Archons of Teyvat are named after the demons of Ars Goetia. Around the symbol in the center, there are 4 shapes, all hexagons with inverted triangles. Now, I tried to find something that looks similar to this, and that was quite the rabbit hole of symbol searching, but I could not find anything that fits. In alchemy, triangles are used to represent the 4 elements, but they look a bit different. Inverted triangles are also meant to be symbols of life or the sacred feminine. I have 2 interpretations of this diagram based on my limited research. These interpretations have a great chance of being wrong, but I still want to share what I found. Firstly, the seal of Chymical marriage is suspicious. When I looked it up, I found the Chymical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, which is an allegorical romance from the 1600s, which has been a source of inspiration for poets but also alchemists. You see, Chymical is an old word for chemical and refers to alchemy, in which the chemical wedding is an important step in the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, which is said to have the ability to convert base metals such as lead or copper to alchemical gold. But alchemists also believe that the elixir of life could be derived from it. The chemical marriage is a combination of opposite substances and the philosophical union of 2 contrary principles, the sun and the moon, heavens and earth, masculinity and femininity. If these 2 paths converging is called a chymical marriage, it must be to create the Philosopher's Stone for the elixir of life. The other interpretation I thought of was the second part of the diagram represents the primordial one and its 4 shades. Perhaps the combination of these 2 components is what led to the creation of the world of Teyvat. But if the Kabbalah tree of life represents the divine, does the primordial one represent mankind? It's hard to answer these questions, but there's more to ponder upon. Now, the rest of the research chronicles the pollution of the water and land by Elynas, the giant beast whose body hosts the entire Merusi village, and the Melusines were born out of him. The researcher recorded the effects of Elynas' flesh and blood on Jakob, who eventually evolved into an Abyss Lector. It is to be noted that these events are taking place around the Cataclysm. The research goes on to talk about how they attempted to open passages, which caused Rifthounds to arrive, and that their properties were identical to Elynas. When we spoke to Elynas, he did mention that he was in a deep cosmos for a long time before he heard the voice of the mother who brought him to Teyvat. The pages also reveal about the presence of these passages in Kandria. The number of passages were large in number, which was true during the Cataclysm. After this, we end up in a space with purple skies and the buildings in a ruin. The researcher says in a new page that this was the result of the world formula after countless calculations. This was the scene that was visible, a world where a sweet flower or mint cannot grow, the end of all things. The writer asks to lend them our strength to avoid this outcome. After going through these quests, something started to make sense to me, which I was doubtful about before. But now it doesn't seem so far off. The world formula is meant to create the Philosopher's Stone, which is mentioned in the Golden Troupe lore as well. The usurper or God King used an immortal stone along with the golden ichor and primordial sea water, which ended up corrupting his people, and this is definitely the ancient kingdom this information came from, because the Narzissenkreuz Institute used the ancient ruins of this very empire. According to the prophecy, the civilizations should be reborn according to Fortuna and are no longer doing it, and will require an external variable from outside the system. If it was some sort of power, there might be a chance. The word Fortuna is interesting because while it is the Roman goddess of fortune, it is also the word used for constellations in Genshin, the Stellar Fortuna. And how do you get this Fortuna? By summoning. And guess who was summoned from Kandria? The Traveler. The Traveler, since the beginning of this story, is someone who doesn't seem to follow the rules of Teyvat. A variable, one might say. Clotar literally said that our sibling was like the Abyss, and then went on to talk about how anyone who could control the Abyss could control everything, meaning a source of power that is outside of the current system of Teyvat, which is currently missing in the world formula. Also, we know that gold was responsible for a majority of the abyssal outbreak during the Cataclysm. She is even credited for the Rifthounds around Teyvat. But a lot of these creatures arrive through passages. considering how the researcher of these did look to Khaenri'ah as a point of information about the passages, Khaenri'ah definitely had something to do with it. You see, in an abandoned letter we found in the underground Khaenri'ah ruins, it is said that Khaenri'ah not just found a way to peek beyond the skies, they also learned how to make their advanced technology through that, and they believed human will would take them beyond the corners of this hollow world. Could the traveler be the one to change this prophecy? Also, was the primordial one the Fortuna in this original world formula? That's it for this video. I have a lot more ideas about everything we learned from these quests, but I think it would be better to discuss them in another video. Let me know your own thoughts and theories on these quests. If you wish to discuss lore with me, I stream at twitch.tv/Pixieebub. Thank you so much for watching until the end, and I will see you in the next one.